My name is John Wilmshurst. I am the manager of the Native Grassland Conservation Program at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. I would like to welcome everyone to this first webinar in a seven webinar series to be presented over the next 2 months, where we are going to be highlighting grassland conservation across Canada. Canada's native grasslands, our most endangered ecosystem. That's the name of the series. CWF is proud to host the series, but it is really the work of a great collaboration of the Canadian Grasslands Coalition through a grant from Environment and Climate Change Canada's Priority Places program that has allowed this series to happen. So we thank Environment Canada for their support. Our work here is to bring awareness to native grasslands to Canadians, and this work can also be found at our website, which is canadasgrasslands.ca. We'll put up a QR code for that later that you can connect, and it'll be in the chat. Members of the Canadian Grassland Coalition live and work across Canada. We wish to acknowledge our presence on the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples who have called this land home since time immemorial. We are committed to working together in a spirit of collaboration, reconciliation, and change, honoring all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. And in that spirit, I would especially like to invite you to the sixth webinar in this series. It'll happen on April 29th. Of course, we encourage you to attend them all. But then we'll have a presentation from Candace, Donna, and Naomi from the Gichio Gimawa Uski Knowledge Center at the University of Saskatchewan, who will present Indigenous-led grassland conservation initiatives. We're really excited about that presentation. Okay, I've got a few housekeeping things I want to talk about, and I'm going to share my screen. Before I do that, okay, so the Zoom, oops, there we go. That's the first little glitch. I'll go back. So Zoom webinar controls. I just want to make sure if you're not familiar with Zoom webinars, how this works. So your audio settings are down in this area. You will be muted during the webinar. We can unmute you for the Q&A session, which will happen at the end. But if you're having trouble hearing, this is where you make those adjustments. There's a chat function. You can use it to introduce yourself and where you're joining from if you like. And then if you have questions for our speakers today, for anybody, you can put those in the Q&A and we'll address that at the end of the webinar. So the Canadian Grassland Coalition our mission is to introduce Canadians to grasslands, what they are, where they are, why they're important, what threatens them, and how we can all help conserve them. We hope that this webinar series will introduce some of you to the amazing places that grasslands in Canada are. And this coalition, you'll see here, these are the people people and organizations that contribute to the coalition and the great work across the country. And now let's get to the topic at hand. So I want to introduce our speakers today. We have two speakers. We're going to start with Jeremy. He's going to kick off the webinar today. Jeremy is the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Director of Prairie Grassland Conservation. Prior to joining the NCC, Jeremy spent 10 years at the University of Calgary conducting ecological research in Northwest Costa Rica, observing firsthand the impact of private land-based conservation action. Jeremy works to help ensure that grasslands remain intact for all of us, including his young family and for future generations. And Jeremy told us earlier that he's got kids at home today having a play date, so we might get to meet Jeremy's young family during the webinar. That'd be exciting. And then Heidi Wisma. Heidi is the Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Grasslands Conservation Council, focusing on connecting people with our rare grasslands through education and community partnerships. She's happiest when she gets to walk alongside people, especially the young and the young at heart, as they discover and rediscover their place in Canada's ecological story, empowering them to participate in caring for the land. So I want to thank Jeremy and Heidi for presenting today, and I would hand it over to Jeremy.
Awesome. Let me get my screen share going. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Really excited to have the opportunity to gush about grasslands. Hopefully, we're all here because we love them. Hopefully, I can make you love them just that little bit much more. And we can do what we can to conserve what remains. Okay, So is everybody seeing my screen? Is it a who am I?
Yep, looks
Kind of
good.
thing? Okay, great. Awesome. So why am I here? Why am I talking to you today? So as John mentioned, thank you for that kind introduction. I am Jeremy Hogan. I'm the Director of Grasslands Conservation for Nature Conservancy of Canada. Been in that role for a few years now. My home is Calgary, which is Treaty 7 territory and Métis Nation Districts 5 and 6. I'm born and raised. This is my home. I have always been an outdoor enthusiast, and there's very few places that would be better for an outdoor enthusiast than Calgary. You have the mountains to the west, you have these amazing grasslands east and south, and the Aspen Parklands to the north. Less scuba diving than I would like. I did live in BC for a little while, but I get my chances when I go to travel, and I always come back home. This is home, and the grasslands are a big part of why. As John mentioned, I was with the University of Calgary before. Grasslands was not my first kind of specialty. I was a primatologist. I studied monkeys. So I had a field site in northwest Costa Rica, and what led me here is that field site is one of the world's conservation success stories. It was a small national park that over time, thanks to the actions and interventions of the government, the local people, and some concerned scientists who were working in Santa Rosa, the park was expanded through private land conservation, and it now runs from the west coast to the east coast of North Costa Rica. It's called the Área de Conservación Guanacaste. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is, I would say, the biggest success story that we've seen in conservation in the last 50 years. The plants and animals that live in that park, the populations have thrived thanks to this action. And the people in the top corner here are two entomologists from the US named Dan and Winnie. And Dan and Winnie were studying insect populations and watching them decline year over year and decided there's no point in studying these things if they're not going to be here 20 years from now. And Dan's favorite saying, which has stuck in my head ever since, is when your house is on fire, you don't need a thermostat, a thermometer, you need a fire hose. We know that there is action needed. We know we have the evidence and the data that there is urgent intervention required to protect the plants and animals and lands that they live on. It's time to stop studying them and it's time to start conserving them. So that is why I put down my thermometer. I stopped studying monkeys, as cool as that was. And I came home to work in one of the most significant but also most threatened places on Earth, right in my own backyard, the prairie grasslands of Canada. And to do that, I've had the privilege of working for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. We are the largest land conservation charity and the largest land conservation organization in Canada. We are partnership driven, so we are solution finders who work with anybody interested in working towards the common outcomes we all desire, which is the long-term durable conservation of our land, our flora, and our fauna. We are looking for resilient landscapes for people and for plants and animals. And that has been a very successful model. To date, we have helped conserve 20 million hectares coast to coast to coast. It's a really great place to work for somebody like me who wants to help drive change. And I think Canada is better off because of that work in a lot of ways. Just to give you an example of how diverse our work is, our projects can be found all across Canada. You are probably within an hour's drive of one of our properties. Most of NCC's lands are open access or can be accessed through invitation. So I would encourage you to do a quick look at see what's available and go explore your backyard because these places are significant and they're magical. I won't spend too much time talking about the nuts and bolts of my day-to-day, but we do go through a very rigorous science and planning exercise before deciding where we're going to work and how we're going to work. Conservation isn't one size fits all, and it has to work for the communities that are involved. It has to work for the lands and the plants and animals that are involved. We are funding limited, as all businesses and charities are, so we have to be very careful that we're putting the dollars where they are most needed. And the way that we work is very dependent on the situation. So we will own land, we will own what are called conservation easements, we will relinquish mineral rights or other resource rights. We use nature-based solutions such as voluntary carbon credit mechanisms. We work very closely with communities and with the people who are on the ground stewarding these lands that benefit us all. And grasslands are one of the most important places we work, and they're special for many, many reasons. Let's just start with some of these amazing plants and animals that live there. So the prairies of Canada are the very northern end of the Great Plains of North America. In Canada, there was originally 60 million hectares of prairie. And you can see some of the amazing animals that live here, including things like pronghorn and burrowing owl, greater sage grouse, swift fox. These animals are all unique and endemic to the Great Plains. There's a ton of biodiversity in these places. In fact, grasslands are more diverse than rainforests at a small scale. So when we think of rainforests as being these crazy, wonderful places full of hundreds of different plants and animal species, that's true for grasslands, but it's true on a square meter basis versus a hectare basis. The biodiversity of grasslands, in fact, is the highest, the record for the most biodiversity from plants in the world in 1 square meter is on a temperate grassland. And there were 90 species of plant in 1 square meter. 90 species. I don't even know if I could name 90 species off the top of my head right now. It's incredible. The word grassland itself has a lot of meanings too. So this is the prairie ecozone of Canada, and you can see that all of these landscapes are within that prairie ecozone. So you have aspen parkland across the northern fringe, which is a mix of aspen forest and grasslands that are in this constant battle for land. There's encroachment and there's some disturbance that pushes the brush back and grasslands thrive and vice versa. There's badlands, there's sandhills in southeast Alberta, southwest Saskatchewan that are these shifting sand dunes that over time the grasses will be blown over by sand and then the grass creeps back over and stabilizes. It's a constant disturbance matrix. The very bottom picture, I think, is classic prairies that we don't actually realize is that prairie pothole ecosystem. So more than half of the breeding waterfowl in North America do so in the prairies. And it's because there's these amazing wetland matrices that are interspersed throughout the grasslands, and they rely on the health and function of each other, as well as you can see in this picture, our food production relies on all of these services as well. And then there's tallgrass prairie to the very far east, where the grasses can be over 6 feet tall, as well as boreal upland pockets. There's fescue grasslands in the montane. I could spend all day, and I'm happy to in the question period, but just will say, go and find how many different grasslands you can go visit in Canada, and you'll be blown away at the diversity. Because they are full of wonder. So grasslands have been culturally significant for the Plains Indigenous people and Métis nations for generations since time immemorial. And grasslands owe their existence to the stewardship by these people. Grasslands are an ecosystem of disturbance, so they rely on grazing pressure from bison and other grazing mammals. They rely on periodic wildfire that burns off woody encroachment, and the stewardship of both of those things by people to cause this constant disturbance regime to occur. That leads to different habitat, what we call heterogeneity. So you get different vegetation stands within a short distance from each other. There might be really tall, long-lived grass in one section, and then recently grazed or recently burned sections right next door. And different plants and animals rely on that mosaic to persist and survive. And that's what keeps grasslands healthy. It was the stewardship of Indigenous people that grasslands even exist to this day. And in more recent generations, a lot of the land is now privately owned and managed by working cattle ranches is by far the most common land tenure of our intact, healthy grasslands remaining. This is our agricultural heartland in Canada. So more than 10% of our jobs in Canada rely on agriculture. Close to 10% of our GDP is based on agriculture and foods that are produced from that primary production. And 90% of that agricultural production comes from the prairies. And that includes millions of hectares of remaining intact native grasslands that serve as cattle production, beef production lands that provide, it's one of the only instances of food production in the world where biodiversity isn't negatively impacted. It actually is benefited from having food produced on top of it because of that intermixed production. And as we mentioned, the biodiversity is just crazy. So there's more species at risk in the grasslands than any other ecosystem. There's a bunch of endemic hotspots, including the cypress uplands, the fescue prairies, and many others. The tallgrass. It's just a really magical place. And it provides a lot of cultural value for all people in Canada. As I mentioned, grazing is an integral component of this ecosystem. And grasslands require that disturbance to be healthy and thriving. So the middle picture here gives you an example of different bird species in the prairies rely on different habitat structure. How dense is the grass? What species are there? How long has it been undisturbed? And what happens over time is if grazing is removed, as it has been because of the removal of bison from this landscape for over 100 years, it becomes a more homogeneous environment where there is fewer micro pockets of diversity, and a lot of plants and animals suffer, and biodiversity declines in that scenario. So if you have mixed grazing and you have sustainably grazed cattle on a landscape, that can stimulate the disturbance that is required for biodiversity to thrive. And this, I mean, there's no better example of this than when Grasslands National Park was formed in Saskatchewan, about, I think it's more than 20 years ago now. Cattle were excluded from the park, and they realized after about 10 years that, oh man, we're seeing declines in grassland health and in biodiversity here. And they actually brought cattle back to graze that landscape. And since then, everything has been begun to return. There's better health outcomes, there's better grassland outcomes. And Environment Canada has recognized this, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and there is now a multi-species action plan for the Grasslands National Park that it specifically prescribes grazing as a core management strategy for the health of that park. Why are we so beyond the plants and animals and people that rely on those lands directly? Why should Canadians care more broadly? For a lot of good reasons, it turns out. So conserved areas provide billions of dollars in ecosystem services every year. They keep our water healthy, they keep the soil healthy that produces our food, they provide the pollinator services that food production relies on. It's good for our mental health. There was a recent meta-analysis just released last week from 75 countries that had a direct correlation between people's perceived quality of life and their personal satisfaction with life and their connection to nature. It's a piece of us. We have been detached from it a little bit as we became an urban society, but we are still a part of nature, and nature is part of our soul. And there are very few places that you can go visit that will reconnect you with that core value, like a grasslands. They're our single best place to sequester carbon in Canada. So as grasslands form over hundreds of years, they're old growth grasslands, the shoots above ground are grazed, they're burned, but the roots grow deeper and longer as that plant survives and pull more and more carbon underground and store it safely in that soil. And that results in about 150 tons of carbon per acre of carbon sequestration. All of that is released upon conversion. Well, half of it on average, I should say, not all of it. And what has been recently demonstrated in a 2021 paper is that Canada's best nature-based solution for sequestering carbon in Canada is ensuring the avoided conversion of any future grasslands. It costs nothing. We just have to not convert it and take care of it. Unfortunately, that is not the case. It is an ecosystem in crisis. This is a North American. This gives you a perspective from the Great Plains at large. But what I want to point out here is that Canada's proportion of lost grasslands is the largest. More than 80% of our grasslands are gone. And that is problematic on many levels. It results in wildlife disappearing. So as I mentioned, there's more species at risk in the prairies than there are in any other ecosystem. Things like the greater sage grouse are critically endangered at this point. Bison has been all but extirpated from the landscape and are now there are managed herds that are returning, and there are some great success stories that are happening of bringing home buffalo by Indigenous nations as well as there's some core populations in our national parks. Grassland songbirds. I know that Birds Canada has a seminar in a few weeks here, but this is some great data that demonstrates that grassland songbirds are in steep decline, the worst of any group of birds. More than two-thirds of their population has disappeared. And when you look at obligate grassland songbirds, which are the ones that require living in the grasslands, it's more than 95% for some species. 300 million songbirds have disappeared off this landscape in the last 50 years. It's a heartbreaking number. And with that, everything that we rely on to stay healthy and thriving is disappearing too. So this isn't just bad for plants and animals, it's bad for our existence. There's well-documented evidence that 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, as they're called, have been breached. Grasslands contribute to all of them except for the ocean-related issues. Insurance and cost. So we lose billions of dollars every year because of having to pay out disaster relief, and that disaster is mitigated, and the worst impacts of those extreme events can be mitigated through the conservation of native habitat. It's also bad for business. So every industry relies on land and biodiversity to create economic value. And the more we extract from that natural capital, the more we're having to pay in other ways to make up for that loss. There's a recent study out from the IPBES that demonstrates that less than 1% of industry is making disclosures regarding their land use and biodiversity impacts. And as a result, 30 times more is spent globally. It's more than $7 trillion a year on environmentally detrimental practices than environmentally beneficial practices, only 200 billion every year. How did this all happen? It's a conversion story. So more than 80% of the prairies has been converted for human use in the last 200 years. Uh, there's also, with this conversion, there's a lot of fragmentation. So the pockets that remain are disconnected from each other, which causes problems for movement and animal and plant migration, degradation from misuse of certain lands, and climate change just makes everything worse. But what is underlying all of this is that less than 6% of our prairie is protected or conserved at this point. Canada as a nation has committed to 30% of land and waters protected by 2030. If we're doing that on an ecosystem basis, we have a lot of work to do in the prairies. And what underlies all of this is economics. So most of this land, over 80%, is privately owned. And the economics of cattle production are outweighed most of the time by the economics of producing other food. So if you're a private landowner who owns grasslands, there are few incentives for you to keep that grassland intact. And it's hard for you to do, in fact, because you're punished economically for doing so. Land values triple if converted land is sold. So you're better off converting your land and selling it. Exacerbating that is that there is an aging demographic of farmers and ranchers. There are limited succession opportunities because land prices have exploded so severely, and people can't buy in, and they can't be the next generation of producers on these lands. And then at sale, typically what happens is it's sold and converted, or that is the riskiest time for conversion is the time of sale. As we increasingly urbanize, there's also more and more land use pressures from suburban development, from energy developments, and all kinds of other things. And that is because grasslands are, in my opinion, unknown and severely undervalued in Canada. So we think of them as these places that are unproductive or marginal, is how they've been classified agriculturally at times. There was a recent study by John and team that demonstrated that less than a quarter of Canadians feel like they could comfortably describe what a grassland is. And most people didn't realize that they were at threat. They thought of all these it's a other place problem. It's the ice caps and the rainforests and the coral reefs. But it's not. It's here and it's home. Um, the undervaluing piece comes from all these other ecosystem services that are provided by the people managing these grasslands. So the carbon sequestration, the water management, the soil health, all of those values are tangible and quantifiable, but the land stewards are not rewarded for the hard work they're putting in to make sure those remain intact and thriving. So there is some, let's call it freeloading happening right now by society off of the hard work of those people, and they're not being rewarded for it. So what do we do about it? I think the first thing is that we need to change the conversation. Everybody in Canada should be proud of their grasslands and should know how important they are to them. Seminars like this are fantastic. I hope that everybody goes and shares what they learned today, and make sure that people realize that grasslands are significant and special and worth conserving for all kinds of reasons. We also need to make sure that the people that are managing and stewarding these grasslands, including historically, are able to do so now and into the future. So we can do that by ensuring long-term conservation. We can do that by providing incentives for those people to manage their lands sustainably. And we can build good policy that enables it, as well as empower the next generation. It's going to take everyone. This is a whole of society problem that requires a whole of society solution. This is where NCC thrives. We are here to help make those partnerships, design those outcomes, and then go get it done. And I want to end by sharing that this isn't a lost cause. By no means is this fight over. And there's been lots of success in the recent years. We have some really amazing partnerships with ranches throughout the prairies. This is a picture of the Waldron Ranch, just south of me, a couple hours in the foothills. The Waldron is a privately owned grazing co-op. It has more than, I'm going to get the number wrong now, and that's embarrassing. There's more than 60 shareholders. I think it's even higher than that. And they have more than 30,000 hectares under their stewardship of these amazing intact significant grasslands. NCC has a conservation easement over their property, and we have partnered to expand their operations over time. So recently they acquired the Bob Creek Ranch next door. And that actually connects the Bob Creek wildlands of Alberta all the way over to the Porcupine Hills, which are both protected areas provincially, with all of this private conserved land in between acting as a bridge. This to me is that Área de Conservación Guanacaste happening at home in Alberta. And I couldn't be more excited about it. And that's happening all over the prairies. There are people that are doing great things. We just have to keep helping them get it done and make sure that that continues after they are ready to retire or move on. So to give you a summary of all of it, NCC has more than 500,000 acres, over 200,000 hectares under our direct control. We also have influence over another 1,000,000 acres through partnerships with community pastures, grazing co-ops, some indigenous partnerships, and providing reconnection to the land opportunities. And just to demonstrate that we're not doing this alone, and Canadians are buying in once they learn about the problem. There has been over $100 million directly contributed to grassland conservation through partnerships with NCC since 2020. So I see nothing but success on our horizon, and it's going to take a lot of work, but I'm excited about the work. And I'm really excited to have this conversation and look forward to all of your questions later today. I don't want to leave this up because I want to give Heidi some time, but I will put it in the chat after. Thank you very much.
All right, Heidi, can you share your screen and tell us about the Grassland Conservation Council of BC?
Absolutely. Here we go. Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Gorgeous. Okay, I think I might have disappeared, but I'll come back at the end. Yeah, no, maybe?
I can still see you.
Oh, you can still see me. That's really good. Because I'm aggressive and it's good to keep that in check and know if I'm being watched or not. So yes, thank you so much for having me here. My name's Heidi Wismath, and I have my dream job. I work with the Grasslands Conservation Council of BC, and I get to coordinate our education and outreach. I'm joining you today from the North Okanagan, which is a very special and today very sunny, getting very warm, unusually warm for this time of year, which is a little scary. We'll get into that too. But the North Okanagan, which is the traditional, ancestral, and very unceded territory of the Silk Okanagan, and where I am, we also overlap with the Secwepemc Nation. And we'll get into this a little bit later too, just talking about all of the connections that come with our grasslands, both for the animal and within those animals, human species and cultures that have grown out of these incredible places. So I wanted to start with asking a question, and I don't know, since I'm not seeing a lot of your faces, which on the one hand makes me less nervous, but on the other hand, I am kind of speaking into the void a little bit. I wonder if maybe, can we count how many people raise their hands? Are we able to do that?
Yep.
Okay, great, perfect. If you could participate, please raise your hand if you knew before the beginning of this year, so before IYRP and all of these wonderful Canadian Grasslands Awareness Coalition blurbs being released, how many of you knew that BC had grasslands? And if you don't, you're not alone. Um, I am glad to see some hands being raised. I actually can't see the full one because my screen is being shared in a particular way. Where are we at, Catherine? Can you
Like
see?
about 62,
Okay,
around
62, and
60 people. Yeah.
we had like 200 and something
Yep.
people.
226.
26. Hey, that's like kind of 1 in 5-ish. That's very good. Like I said, you're very not alone for people who didn't raise your hand, especially for people who live in our province and see all of the lush green we get with our amazing Pacific coastal climate. Our grasslands are not well understood, not well studied, and not well protected. And we're going to get into that today. Our grasslands form in very specific spots. They form in rain shadows. So when you come in from the Pacific Ocean and you drive up into Hope, which is where I was raised, grew up, you see incredible downpour and cedar and lush fern. This is where all of, at least most of the rain from the Pacific Ocean gets dumped. Right after that, you climb up the Cascade Mountains and through into Merritt, and you're in a desert of sorts. Not a true desert because we only have one of those, and that's closer to me where I am in the Okanagan now. But you get into these incredible open, big sky, golden hill landscapes that don't cover much of our province, only 1% of the land base, but have all of these incredible species that are, of course, adapted to living in grasslands and don't live anywhere else. So we see that 30% of our species at risk in the province live and are intimately connected to those 1%, that 1% area. So if there's anything that you take away with you from all of my rambling today, I would hope that it would be that we have these 1% areas supporting disproportionate amounts of our biodiversity. And not just year-round biodiversity, but also in the Okanagan, we get 75% of the migratory birds that come to BC to overwinter and breed and nest. They come through the Okanagan and they rely on the grasslands that we have there too. Okay, so it was actually really hard to rein it in and decide what to talk about for this presentation, and I don't have that much time. We have 8 whole grassland regions. We have one on our Vancouver Island. We have some up in the north. And I'm just gonna right away direct you to our website, which is bcgrasslands.org. You can find lots of reports, lots of information about all of these places because I simply do not have time to go into all of them, which is a really, really nice problem to have. So just moving us along here, I probably should have showed you this slide while we talked about the rain shadows so you can picture them. But in this map, we can see that the red, the orange, the yellow, all of these ecosystems, those 4 there that I've put the little arrow beside, those are our grassland ecosystems for the most part. Those are our major grassland ecosystems in BC. And they do follow our rain shadows. And one important thing about them is that they are connected to the Great Basin. So we have the Rocky Mountains separating us from the wonderful prairies that Jeremy just introduced us to. A lot of our species are northern cousins or northern, if not the same species, a subspecies of the Great Basin, which is an ecosystem that runs all the way down into the center of the United States and Nevada. And that's why some of the creatures, some of the plants, some of the soil types that we see in these areas are more like the Great Basin than the Great Plains. So it's helpful to think about our little grasslands as little pockets or islands in these rain shadows. So they're isolated and because of that, the species there are both very sensitive and uh, sensitive to disturbance, and it makes their populations very vulnerable because they can't just move elsewhere easily. Whew. One second. But BC shouldn't even have grasslands. And when I say shouldn't, I only mean I only mean that, like Jeremy said, grasslands depend on fire. They have a natural succession. These grasses fix all of these sad little soils sometimes where they come in and produce amazing, rich humus for us to grow in. But to do that over a long time and to not have shrubs, not have trees grow in, they require fire or some sort of disturbance. And so in BC, oh, wait, sorry, I just wanted to show you a picture of a badger. We'll talk about them more later, but remember, 1 and 30%. Um, so fire in BC was removed from the landscape during colonization in 1874. And this fire suppression led to forest encroachment. It led to invasive species. It led to Indigenous people. A short list of the First Nations who had major ties to grasslands. So in BC, we have 200 bands, at least 200 bands. There's a little bit more or a little bit less, depending on who you talk to, and 7 major language groups. There's actually more language groups here in BC than the rest of Canada combined, which makes it just culturally an incredibly, incredibly fascinating and beautiful place. These nations listed here are some of the ones who whose territories heavily or at least cultures became quite tied to grasslands in their areas. But there are other nations, of course, who would have interacted with grasslands and would have in their language and their culture grassland related traditions. I'm in the territory of top of the list there, the Syilx Okanagan people, and I did my schooling into Kamloops or Kamloops, which is the confluence and the heart of the Secwepemc people. I think for time's sake, we're going to move, yes, to ranching, because at the same time as cultural burning was taken from the landscape and the people, we introduced grazing as well. So BC's grasslands did evolve with grazers. We have deer, we have mule and white-tailed deer. We also had elk here in the Okanagan and up into the caribou, and of course, caribou, both in the caribou and elsewhere. And these grazers are fairly mobile. They move through areas, they migrate. They don't tend to hunker down in a spot and go to town, which the grasses here learned and evolved with. And so when ranching was introduced at the end, or sorry, in the 1800s, we saw a really steep decline in the health and productivity of the grasslands here because of overgrazing, because of a lack of rotational grazing, because of seeing wildlife excluded and cattle populations staying and overwintering. So sorry, one more thought before we move into the state that we find grasslands in this particular time that most of us are now living in. The upside of ranching in BC, similar to elsewhere, because there has been so much development and urban development in grasslands, we can see that there are patterns where grasslands that have range, that have healthy management practices, are actually doing quite a bit better than our unprotected grasslands and our grasslands, of course, that have been developed. Like Jeremy said, there are these important management opportunities where humans can continue to be an active force on the landscape and can continue to provide ourselves sustenance, economy, wealth, and also keep in mind the needs of the grasses, the wildlife, and all of those creatures. And some of our working ranches are prime examples of where you can see healthy grasslands today. So, yes, our grasslands entered this century in a rather dilapidated condition. They are not doing great. Like I said, we've had quite a bit of urban expansion, especially here in the Okanagan. The North Okanagan has lost half of its native grasslands. And in BC in general, we see it's been about a 16% drop. And once again, remember, we only have 1% of our land base in grasslands at all. So this ends up being numbers. Sorry, less than 1 million hectares. Nevertheless, supporting thousands of species at risk. We can chat a little bit more at the end about the nuances of figuring out how many species we've got in our grasslands, but it's between 3 and 10,000. I'm gonna move on because there's a lot to unpack there. So somebody can ask me about that if they're very specifically wondering, but you can also Google it, that's fine. Climate change is also rapidly pressuring our grassland systems through drought, through the snowpack and lack of snowpack in the Okanagan here. It's quite scary. We only have 60% of our usual snowpack this winter, so we are expecting a very dry summer. Invasive species like cheatgrass and knapweed do really, really well in these disturbed situations and can make the situation worse by then altering those fire regimes, by making the soil and the grassland ecosystem more susceptible to fire because they're tinder dry by the time that fires are rolling through. Those plants also put our agricultural and tourism centers of economy at risk. I talked about economics once. But Jeremy luckily covered so many of the things that we rely on for grasslands, and ranching is ranching. I'm now going to move into talking about the Grasslands Conservation Council. So that was the context that the GCC was born into. We were founded in 1999, and the GCC emerged at a time of growing recognition that BC's grasslands were disappearing and they weren't being protected adequately. So it was a coalition of ranchers, conservation biologists, Indigenous land managers, government agencies, and community members who all got together and said, these grasslands are worth saving. And we continue to do that work at the GCC 26 years later, through education, through community outreach. We do conservation and restoration work. We have research projects and partner with research projects. And we support policy in BC with 30 by 30 coming. We are very much in our MP's offices and talking to the people who are making those decisions and making sure that grasslands are on the list for protected areas. Because once again, we only have about 10%. Again, it depends on the numbers that you look at and what you consider protected, but we have about 10% of our grasslands protected. Yeah, like I said, grasslands don't stop at these at fence lines, at municipal boundaries, and so neither do we. That's one of our strengths. That's one of our challenges as a Pan BC organization, is staying connected with all of these communities. And that's a big part of why I'm here in the Okanagan, is to work with local conservation organizations and communities with whatever projects they want to see. And like I said, I have my dream job. It's pretty exciting stuff. Happy to answer more questions about that at the end too. But one, can I get a time check? And two, I want to start telling you about some of these incredible species that we have in BC.
There's 15 minutes left, but continue for as long as you need to.
Oh my goodness, 15 minutes total. Oh no, that's not good. Okay. We're going to whip through these. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna uh like speed friend you to all of these incredible plants and animals. And if you have any questions about them, I will leave us time to do that at the end. So I'm gonna go really quick here. We don't have time for these. I was going to show you them at the end. These are all wildflowers that I've seen just in my little walk in my little grasslands here just in this last week. So it's very exciting. It's a very exciting time here in the North Okanagan. Um, First off, antelope brush. I really want you to meet antelope brush because they're this really interesting nuance. They are common. The plants themselves are yellow listed in BC, which means that they're not of incredible concern, but the ecosystem that they define, the ecosystem antelope brush habitat, is red listed, and it's our most endangered habitat in BC. So what I want to show us here is just that nuance between you can have a plant in relative abundance and its population be secure, but it can still be at risk because it is part of a red listed ecosystem. Um, and antelope brush is the primary habitat for an incredible bird that we don't see anywhere else in Canada. We have the only population of them here in the South Okanagan, the sage thrasher. And because they are red listed in BC, they are also endangered in Canada. And they rely on low nesting sites and minimal disturbance. So when we see fragmentation or we see uh, poor recreation practices, sage thrashers are some of the first birds to leave and never come back and disappear because there's nowhere else for them to go. Okay, badger. I know that badger is elsewhere, but in BC, we have a special subspecies and they are red listed. This is the Jepson subspecies. And as a result, they are endangered in Canada. Similar to elsewhere, we struggle with road mortality for badgers. We have less than, I think, 200 of them in BC. And they are carefully managed by an organization whose link you can check out on screen. You can screenshot that if you want. But they're incredibly important species because they, through hunting, through digging, create burrows for other creatures, like the burrowing owl, which, oh, that's a baby badger. I'm obsessed with badgers. Okay, sorry. Um, Burrowing owls. I know that folks have burrowing owls elsewhere, but in BC we almost lost them in 1980, and through an impressive breeding program that is still trying to get them out there, we do have an amount of happy little burrowing owls out there, and this is one of the species that relies on badgers to create their burrows for them because they can fly. They just don't dig. They don't dig. Um, we have cactus. I promised I'd go so quick, but we do have one of the only 3 cactus in Canada. They're blue listed, which means that they're special concern in Canada. And they're incredibly resilient. Their major issue right now is habitat loss. So they can work with climate change, but even the most resilient species can't work with land development. I'm going to make this our last one. Blue bunch wheatgrass. Again, this is similar to antelope brush in that this is a yellow listed species. We don't have particular concerns. They're not rare. We see them everywhere. They're actually very much the backbone of our forage in BC's grasslands. But the ecosystem that they define, that bunch grass, is red listed. I'm not going to go over that too much. Um, Please screenshot this. Please add your name to this petition. I'm so sorry to be going through this so quickly, but I want us to have time for questions. The Vernon Commonage is a really important development here in the North Okanagan. This is absolutely critical habitat, and like I said, just please screenshot this. Please add your name to the petition, because this is something that I'm in council talking about right now. So we would love to have more signatures, and we're really close to our goal. Thank you. I'm going to pass it back over to John, I think is going to take it away. But thank you, everybody who's been part of this. No more thank yous, no long thank yous. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Heidi. Your passion shows through. It's really great to see. And thank you also, Jeremy, for a great presentation. I love the work that the Nature Conservancy does, and it's inspiring for conservation across the country. So, yeah, thank you both. Really fantastic presentations. I also want to introduce Catherine. She is the other part of the Native Grasslands Conservation Program at the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and she's organizing all these webinars. And I didn't introduce her at the top, but you heard her voice, or you'll hear her voice sometimes through the webinars, and she really helps make this all happen. So Catherine is there, and yes, we did get a couple of questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and there was a really great question from Judith, as Ross is quite anxious for us to answer that, and I'm going to ask Jeremy if you can tackle that one. Can you still see it, Jeremy?
Uh,
Or do you want me to read it?
no. Yeah, please do.
Okay. From Judith, it says, how can Sask grasslands be best protected from monoculture farming? With industrial farming, even breaking and planting fragile, unproductive land areas, hedgerows, which have supported flora and fauna biodiversity, are all torn out to accommodate the huge equipment needed for this kind of farming.
I would say that is a great question. Thank you, Judith. I would challenge the language a little bit in that I don't think there is protection from food production required. I think there is recognition that the values that grasslands provide are not being properly accounted for, and we're actually costing ourselves externalities by ripping them up. So until we can get onto equal footing with the economics of agricultural production through the valuation of ecosystem services, there has to be some ownership of conserving those marginal habitats, those remaining grasslands as significant, if unquantified, providers of all of the things that we rely on. So just to give you a good example, the paper that I referenced in the talk that I didn't have a link for estimated that the native pollinator services from grasslands and the prairies provides $2.5 billion worth of economic value to crop production in the prairies every year, and that feeds about 25 million people through that service. So as we lose grasslands, we're losing that pollinator value, and we're having to put more inputs in to get the same output of food production. And there will be a tipping point, and society has to own that and recognize that we value grasslands. Even if we don't have a dollar figure on them, we know how important they are, and that we are doing what it takes to conserve them.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Judith. We've got a couple of questions as well in the Q&A, and the first one is from Susanna, and it asks, does anyone have good sources of educational material regarding grasslands, things that we can integrate into youth programs and general public engagement? This sounds like it's going your way, Heidi.
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, I guess it partly depends on, and I don't know if you mentioned the asker's name, but where our asker is. But we are creating BC grassland education resources. We have an incredible program that's running in Kamloops. So if you're in Kamloops, specifically check out that. But otherwise, we have a number of coloring sheets. We have a daycare education, like early education, aged grassland resource, and we're creating new ones and partnering with organizations to do that. And you can find that on our website. I can't speak for NCC.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's very important. I think that making sure that the next generation and future generations to come are part of the conversation, because this is their world that they're inheriting. And I think that there will be answers that are to come from those people. And the earlier that people can get to know the ecosystems that surround them and the importance of those places and those plants and those animals, the better. So NCC does community engagement events. I would encourage you all to check out our website. We have volunteer events. We have educational forums like this that we put on throughout the year, virtually and in person. And I think probably John and Kathleen have some resources through the Awareness Coalition too.
Yeah, and there's some people putting some resources as well into the chat, so you can have a look there. Prairie Conservation Action Plan, based in Saskatchewan, they do some really great youth education programs, and you can look up them as well. So I think there's plenty of resources out there. And I know there's also a question from Mike Dadles, who you know quite well, Heidi, I'm sure. And he says, please, Heidi, tell us about the importance of connecting with youth, what Jeremy just referred to.
Oh, yeah, the importance of connecting. I was after mentioning our website, which is at bcgrasslands.org. I was thinking that that's great for people who want to use the resources themselves, but for a lot of us, it is just important to know that there are organizations talking to youth and making those conversations and connections happening. And maybe I didn't mention it because it's my favorite part of the job. It's barely part of the job. We're partnering with the Allen Brooks Center in Vernon here to go into classrooms and talk to kids about the grasslands that they live in. And that's just been absolutely incredible. The Allen Brooks Center is a wonderful, wonderful organization. I recommend that you check them out as well, Allen Brooks Nature Center. But to connect with these kids and to see them putting the pieces together to know that they understand not only what climate change is, but that humans have a really big piece of what's to come in that, and to be able to influence that empowerment and just like see the connections that are already there. So many of our young people, despite living in urban places, do want to have those connections and do see those as, like we touched on before, an important part of who we are as people. And it's just an absolute joy to be able to facilitate that and just kind of direct some of those questions in good ways for them to go. I think that's
Fantastic.
why it's important.
It totally. I couldn't agree more. We've only got a little over a minute left. There was one question in the Q&A. The slides were well constructed and informative. This comes from Julie Figures. Can they be used as an educational tool by other groups? Heidi, are your slides, once we share maybe people could contact you directly and you can put your email in the chat if you wanted to share, you had some materials that you could share, perhaps that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I can't actually, in my settings, I can't actually post to anybody except you three lovely
Oh,
co-hosts.
okay.
Um, Maybe if Catherine's able to post in the main chat for me, yeah, our BC Grasslands and my email, or Mike's email, or our
Yeah.
info email.
Okay, perfect. And we'll share Jeremy's email too, if that's okay with you, Jeremy, so people
Please
can get in
do.
touch with you if they want to. Yeah, okay, excellent. Okay, well, we're running close to time, and I want to thank again Heidi and Jeremy for the presentations. They were great. Uh, and I would encourage you to attend next week. On the 1st of April, we have Rennie Griltz from the Mawassan Urban Grassland in Saskatoon, and he's going to be presenting on rethinking urban grasslands, disturbance, stewardship, and public engagement. And I would encourage you to all visit the canadasgrasslands.ca website to learn more about grasslands. And if you will if you've registered, which you have for this webinar series, you will be getting an email that will have a link to the presentations today and invitations to the future webinars that are coming up. So thank you very much for attending today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Go visit a grassland.
Yeah, go touch some grass, as the kids say. Thanks for being here.